Troy's a big kid. He just loves life.
Anaheim, California, January 10th, 2026. The most watched motocross debut in recent memory is less than a minute old when everything falls apart. A Ducati hits the ground. A rider gets carried out. 45 years building toward a moment like this, and in less than a minute, it was already fallen apart. Most companies would quietly absorb the damage and move on. Troy Lee Designs did not build a 4-decade legacy by playing things safe. And in less than a minute, their biggest gamble was already slipping away. Before there was a team, before there was a brand, before there was even a proper business, there was a 20-year-old kid in Corona, California, who was better at painting than he was at racing. Troy Lee grew up in a family where going fast was practically coded into the bloodline. His grandfather, Marvin Lee, was a co-founder of the Bonneville Speed Trials, the event that existed purely to find out how fast a machine could go on a flat stretch of salt. His father, Larry, was both an artist and a motorcycle racer, so when Troy came along and turned out to be pretty decent at motocross, nobody was particularly surprised. What nobody saw coming was what happened next. By the early 1980s, Troy was riding the Southern California off-road circuit, grinding through the same tracks as dozens of other ambitious young racers. Somewhere in the middle of it all, he started painting helmets. Not as a side hustle, not strategically, he just had a gift for it. The riders around him noticed, and word spread fast. Before long, the custom paint jobs he was producing in his parents' garage were showing up on the heads of professional racers, and the phone kept ringing. He walked away from racing. No guarantee he'd succeed, no clear path to a living, no real business model to speak of, but he bet everything on painting helmets. It was a bad bet on paper.
And I didn't get to make it to the level in racing that I wanted, so it was a way for me to kind of work with the great, some of the greatest racers in the world.
He turned his back on the only clear route forward. In 1981, at 20 years old, Troy Lee Designs was born. A garage operation, a kid with brushes, and an idea. What came after the garage is one of those stories that sounds made up, but it's not. Troy spotted a gap in the market for better-looking, better-performing helmet visors. The existing options were either ugly or useless, or both. So he started making his own, vacuum-forming plastic right in his mother Linda's kitchen oven. The problem was the smell. Melting and burning plastic has a particular kind of odor that doesn't make for a pleasant home environment.
I did get it hot enough in there where I got plastic on the oven. It was a gas oven, and as I was doing it, I was trying to get it done before my parents came home. I started realizing that the whole house smelled really toxic.
Linda, who was also printing his first business cards at the time, eventually hit her limit and told him the kitchen was no longer available for manufacturing operations. The business moved into a leased hangar at the Corona Municipal Airport. The lease had a clause that required tenants to dedicate at least 40% of their work to aviation-related services. Troy had no choice. He started painting registration numbers and did custom designs on a private aircraft.
So I had to moved into the Corona Airport, and I had to do 50% of the 50% of my work had to be aviation work. So I was painting helmets and painting airplanes, and doing jet skis and doing everything else. But I had to keep popping out and painting airplanes and putting tail numbers on them, and which is kind of fun, anyways.
Now the same kid who painted helmets had to get it right on an airplane. Scaling from a motorcycle helmet to a private aircraft changes everything. The application techniques had to shift, the operational discipline had to tighten, and the business model had to grow up overnight. There was no room for mistakes. I mean, a bad helmet paint job looks unprofessional. A bad airplane paint job is not something you can afford to get wrong. The pressure forced him to professionalize at speed. He didn't plan for any of this, he just adapted, and the brand got stronger for it. By the late 1980s, the demand for custom helmet painting had gone from manageable to overwhelming, and Troy was already thinking beyond paint. Moving into the 1990s, TLD forged a working relationship with Japanese helmet manufacturer Shoei. The collaboration gave TLD something it had never had before: direct access to mass manufacturing know-how, international distribution channels, and rigorous impact testing protocols. The company moved out of the airport hangar in 1991 into a proper facility in a nearby business park, expanding into mountain bike apparel, stickers, and sportswear. Then in 1995, they released the Daytona mountain bike helmet. This helmet changed downhill mountain biking. It set new standards for ventilation and weight reduction. Its look was aggressive and modern. Nothing else on the market looked like it.
The first helmet I built was the Daytona. After that was a copy of the kind of took in the showy jet ski helmet and that I put a mouth guard on and evolved it into a carbon Daytona. And then the D2 was the next step, and then D3 and D4, and now I'm working on D5, so.
This was the moment TLD stopped being a niche brand. Visibility skyrocketed. The industry saw a new standard. Troy Lee Designs was no longer just a paint shop. It was a player. By 1998, TLD had built enough equity in the bike world to start developing a dedicated motocross apparel line. In that same year, the brand took a step that said something important about how Troy Lee understood his own culture. In 1998, Troy Lee Designs played a foundational role in launching a motocross event unlike anything else on the calendar. A Day in the Dirt was conceived by stuntmen Kenny Alexander and Jimmy Roberts, whose fathers had been members of the Viewfinders, an off-road motorcycle club formed by Hollywood stuntmen in the early days of desert racing. The event was created as a tribute to Steve McQueen, actor, motorcycle racer, and cultural legend, with proceeds going to the Steve McQueen Memorial Fund for Boys Republic. Held every Thanksgiving weekend in Southern California, the event mixed film industry professionals with extreme sports icons and legitimate racing legends. Jeremy McGrath, Jeff Ward, Ricky Johnson, Dave Mira, Sean Palmer. The celebrity team race, the North versus South Challenge, the grueling 2.5-hour coup de grace. This was not a corporate activation. This was TLD saying out loud that they were the people who understood what this culture actually was. The brand wasn't just making gear for the sport, it was actively authoring the story of the sport. Over the years, the event moved through venues including Los Angeles County Raceway and Glen Helen, and it was immortalized in documents produced by Matt Francis and Verb Moto. Those films exist because TLD existed, and because Troy Lee genuinely believed that the lifestyle surrounding the sport deserved to be documented and celebrated. That dual identity, technical equipment maker and cultural curator, would define everything that came next. Gear companies do not do this. They do not cross this line. Here's why. A factory race program costs millions. It requires relentless logistics, and the politics inside the sport can end a team overnight. One wrong move with a manufacturer, and your future disappears. Most gear brands stay on the sideline. They sponsor a rider, they put a logo on a bike, they call it a day. TLD though? TLD went all the way in. The early mountain bike team efforts, led initially by riders like Eric Carter and Lee Donovan on the Intense team, established the operational blueprint. But it was the mid-2000s Supermoto era that really made the industry pay attention. Between 2004 and 2006, the TLD race team, with riders including Jeff Ward, Cassidy Anderson, Doug Henry, and Chris Fillmore, rammed through the AMA Supermoto series and collected multiple championships across both the 250cc and 450cc classes.
I started Supermoto playing around with Scott Russell and Jeff Ward and Jeremy, and they were starting that new series, and Red Bull was sponsoring it and said, we were having so much fun riding Supermoto. I'm like, wow, I want to race too. So we started there. And
they weren't just competing, they were winning titles. That track record and the institutional knowledge built during those years made TLD a credible management operation. When Honda came knocking, then KTM, then Gas, the brand had the receipts to prove it could handle elite-level racing programs. It wasn't luck. It was years of grinding work that put TLD in the room when the biggest conversation in American off-road racing eventually came together.
Ray Blank gave me the opportunity on Honda, and then after that, Roger gave me the opportunity on KTM, and then after that, they came and said, we bought Gas, would you be interested? And I said, if you help me with a 450 rider, I'm interested. And so, yeah.
The Gas program didn't end on the track. It ended off it. But by then, TLD had already proven it belonged at the highest level. That conversation took decades to arrive, and it arrived in a form nobody had fully anticipated. Before the Ducati chapter, there were the years where Troy Lee Designs stopped being just Troy Lee's company. This is where brands usually stop being themselves. In late 2016, private investment firm SBJ Capital acquired a controlling interest in TLD. The firm, which managed over $200 million in committed capital and had invested in brands like Pete's Coffee and Tea and Wired Magazine, brought in Dave Bertram as CEO. Bertram's background was in building cycle gear into a national retail chain. He knew the motorcycle industry, and under his watch, the brand made real progress standardizing retail operations and expanding direct-to-consumer channels. Jason Steris, who had spent 23 years helping take Volcom from a startup to a publicly traded company, followed as CEO, tasked specifically with the challenge of making corporate efficiency and authentic culture coexist. And that balance almost never works. Anyone who's watched a beloved brand get absorbed into private equity knows the anxiety. Does it survive intact, or does the pressure to optimize every margin eventually sand off everything that made it interesting in the first place? Something was at risk of being lost. Not efficiency, identity. In 2022, SBJ sold TLD to the Two Ride Group, a French powersports conglomerate. Jean-Eric Burleson stepped in as CEO, and the brand found itself operating as one property within a much larger multinational structure. Financially, it provided stability during a brutal post-pandemic period for the bicycle and motorcycle industries. Creatively, the constraints of a distant parent company are a different kind of problem. A distant parent company makes decisions you can't reverse. There's something clarifying about that. The thing you built from scratch in your mother's kitchen at 20 years old now sits inside a holding group in France. And for the first time in 45 years, you're not sure the brand still knows its own name. What happened on July 31st, 2024 started a chain of events that would end with a Ducati MotoGP manufacturer attempting something it had never done before. And the only reason they picked up the phone to call TLD was because of what happened next. July 31st, 2024, Troy Lee bought his company back. For years, the brand didn't fully belong to him. Now, once again, it did. The weight was lifted, the control returned. A world-class American family backed the transaction. The investors stayed unnamed, but the effect on the industry was instant. Troy Lee kept his roles: chairman, strategic advisor, inspirational leader. The brand was his again. Finally. The creative vision untethered. No permissions needed. No distant parent company making calls he couldn't reverse. He had it back. And their first move? A massive swing. Ducati had a problem. The problem was a good one to have, but a problem nonetheless. The Borgo Panigale manufacturer had spent years developing the Desmo 450 MX, a motocross machine built around Ducati's signature desmodronic valve timing system. Testing in Europe involved genuinely serious names. 9-time MX World Champion Tony Cairoli, Alessandro Lupino, Jeremy Seaver, and Mattia Guadagnini all contributed to the development program. By 2025, the bike was ready. The question was no longer whether the machine could compete. The question was how you walk into the American Supercross world, arguably the most insular and culturally specific racing environment on Earth, without getting treated like an outsider who showed up to someone else's party. Well, you can't do it alone. The sport has its own codes, its own history, its own set of names and faces that the fan base trusts implicitly. If this went wrong, it wouldn't just be a bad debut. Ducati had never been part of American Supercross. This was their first shot at credibility in a sport that doesn't give second chances easily. A European manufacturer with a road racing identity needed a translator, not literally, culturally. Paolo Ciabatti, the general manager of Ducati Corse Off-Road, put it plainly. The goal was to inject Ducati's racing DNA into the sport through a partner who understood that racing is a blend of passion, innovation, and lasting aesthetic impact. The moment TLD came back to independence, the call made sense for both sides. The partnership was announced in 2025. Troy Lee Designs would orchestrate Ducati's factory entry into the American Supermotocross Championship for the 2026 season. The team's full name? Troy Lee Designs Red Bull Ducati Factory Racing. What TLD assembled around the Ducati was not a modest debut entry. It was a statement. Red Bull had been a TLD partner for over 21 years across Supermoto, Motocross, and Supercross. Their involvement brought financial backing and a level of marketing reach that most racing programs simply can't access. Factory connection, specialists in suspension and chassis setup came in to manage the complex work of adapting a European-developed motocross platform to the rhythm-heavy, hard-pack realities of American Supercross tracks. Chip Ganassi Racing, one of the most successful motorsport organizations in IndyCar and sports car racing, provided advanced technical support, data analytics collaboration, and a paddock hospitality setup that brought Formula One levels of professionalism to the off-road world. Team manager Josh Weisner ran the day-to-day. Troy Lee remained team owner, and the riders were exactly who the situation required. Justin Barcia, number 51, known throughout the paddock as Bam Bam. Barcia was not just another rider on the roster. He was the tone setter, the one rider capable of forcing the sport to take the bike seriously immediately. A back-to-back 250 SX East champion in 2011 and 2012, a multiple race winner, and the kind of starter whose aggression at the gate can change a race in the first 30 seconds. Barcia had history with TLD going back to their gas partnership, where he earned multiple podiums and a 450 SX win in 2021. He knew the team, and the team knew him.
Feels amazing to be part of the whole Trolley Designs Red Bull Ducati factory racing team. Extremely excited to be back with the crew. The Ducati is awesome, and it's red. It's going to be a lot of fun. Go really fast.
Dylan Ferrandis, number 14, the French technical rider who won back-to-back 250 Supercross West Championships in 2019 and 2020, then walked into his rookie 450 year in 2021 and took the Pro Motocross 450 title. His work rate is relentless, and his feedback loop is precise. Exactly what an engineering team needs when they're still learning what their bike can and cannot do under race conditions.
It's a big project. Very, very excited. I'm very happy to be part of it. And I think as soon as I was talking with the guy about this, I was very excited, and I knew pretty much everyone in the team, and I really wanted to be part of that. And very proud, very happy, and very confident now that I know where we are with the team, with the bike, and everything. Very, very excited for the seasons to start. I think the bike is very great.
The team launch took place on January 6, 2026 at the K1 circuit in Winchester, California, 4 days before the season opener. The race-configured Ducati 450 Desmo MX was unveiled wearing a striking ombre graphics kit and a hand-painted front fender, a direct callback to where Troy Lee started in that garage over 40 years ago. 4 days later, at Anaheim 1, everything was on the line. The morning at Angel Stadium was everything the team could have hoped for. Both Barcia and Ferrandis ran fast in qualifying. The Ducati was not a novelty act. In the heat race, Barcia charged to third. Ferrandis took fourth after a hard battle. Both transferred directly to the main event. Then the gate dropped. On the opening lap, Malcolm Stewart came up short on the triple and rolled the final section. Barcia was already committed to clearing the triple and had nowhere to go. He landed on Stewart and got launched over the bars. That impact was immediate and sickening. The red flag went out. Barcia didn't move for several minutes. The Alpine Stars medical team was on the track immediately. When they transported him on a backboard to a local hospital, the entire paddock went quiet. The kind of hit that usually ends seasons, or careers. Malcolm Stewart dislocated his shoulder in the same incident. The data from Barcia's Alpine Stars Tech Air MX airbag system told the full story. The crash lasted 2.7 seconds. Peak impact, 27.6 G. That's like being in a car wreck at highway speed. 2 broken transverse processes in his back, and a severe concussion. He walked out of the hospital under his own power. Given what the sensors recorded, that's not normal. That is modern protective gear doing its job. But he was out for the season, indefinitely. This wasn't just losing a rider. It was losing half the program. 2 data points became 1. The rider expected to push the limit was gone. Suddenly, the entire factory program rested on one rider, Dylan Ferrandis. After watching his teammate get taken away on a stretcher, Ferrandis lined up for the restart at Anaheim 1 and climbed back onto the Ducati. He crashed once himself in the chaos of the restart, pulled himself back up, navigated through the field, ran inside the top 6 for a stretch, and finished 7th, on a bike making its debut on the worst possible night emotionally. Ducati had its first ever Supercross main event result. From that point forward, he wasn't just racing. He was developing the bike under race conditions. Every lap mattered. Every finish mattered. What followed was the kind of story that doesn't get told loudly enough. Ferrandis, acting as the sole data point for the entire engineering team, carried every session on his own. Early in the season, he showed flashes of real pace, even posting the fastest lap in the main event. Through the middle rounds, he kept the program visible in the premier class, fighting against the most established riders in the world on a bike that had barely seen an American Supercross track before its debut. The results weren't dominant, but they were real. The Ducati stayed in the fight, running inside the top half of the field with its lead rider out and the entire program still learning in real time. That's not a consolation story, that's a proof of concept. None of what TLD does on the track exists in a vacuum. Every result, every crash, every moment we just talked about runs through one constant: the gear. Not as a product, as a consequence. Because the sport doesn't give you clean outcomes. It gives you impacts. It gives you mistakes at speed. And over time, you start to see the same patterns show up again and again. The same types of crashes, the same injuries, same moments where things go wrong. That's where this part of the story actually lives. Not in a catalog, in repetition. TLD has spent over 4 decades inside those moments, watching riders go down, watching what fails, watching what holds, and slowly, piece by piece, adjusting to it. Not chasing perfection, just trying to stay one step ahead of what the sport does to people. The Barcia crash at Anaheim 1 is the kind of moment that puts all of that into focus. A hit like that changes seasons, sometimes careers, and he walked out of the hospital. That doesn't happen by accident. But the gear is only half of it. The other half is the people who built it. Maki Ushiroyama spent over 3 decades shaping how this brand looked and felt, from helmets to race team graphics. Not just designing products, but defining the visual identity of an entire era. Ben Smith was part of that same stretch, helping push protection forward during a time when the sport was changing fast, before moving on to build something of his own. And through all of it, Troy Lee stayed at the center, not as a figurehead, but as someone who was actually there. From painting helmets in a garage to sitting in on race programs at the highest level of the sport, still connected to the same thing that started it. That's not a brand built on strategy decks or product cycles. It's built on time, on repetition, on people who stayed close enough to the sport to understand what actually matters when things go wrong. That's the part you just can't fake, and it's the reason any of this still works. Troy Lee was 20 years old when he decided that painting helmets for other racers was more interesting than being a racer himself. That choice, made in a garage in Corona in 1981, led to an airport hangar, a showy partnership, the Daytona helmet, factory team ownership, corporate control, and eventually taking the company back. It was never a clean path. The brand spent years inside structures that didn't serve it. The buyback in 2024 wasn't just a transaction. It was a correction. And the 2026 season, for all its chaos, for the crash that ended Barcia's year in its opening minutes, and for Ferrandis carrying the program alone, made the case. TLD belongs exactly where it placed itself. Ducati needed someone the paddock would trust. Troy Lee Designs had been earning that trust for decades. Do you think Ducati actually wins with this program, or are they still years away? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay wicked.